Welcome to the Best Interest Podcast, where we believe Benjamin Franklin's advice that an investment in knowledge pays the best interest, both in finances and in your life. Every episode teaches you personal finance and investing in simple terms. Now, here's your host, Jesse Kramer.
Hello and welcome to episode 78 of the Best Interest Podcast. My name is Jesse Kramer. Later on in today's episode, Justin Peters is going to be joining me. Justin and I are going to have a fun back and forth conversation where we compare and contrast these independent lists that he and I each put together of what we consider to be the golden rules, the most important rules of personal finance. On some ideas, we were the same. On some ideas, we had big differences, and we talk our way through it. And I think it's just an enlightening conversation, not only for Justin and I, but maybe you guys will walk away with some new thoughts on things that we find important and that maybe you should find important in your personal finances too. But first, I want to do a quick listener review. As always, this review comes from Apple Podcasts. I really enjoy when you guys leave reviews on Apple Podcasts. I'm happy to read them on the podcast and send you some best interest gear, typically a nice soft t-shirt. And it really is soft, by the way. This review comes from Derek D09. Supremely useful and accessible. Jesse has a knack for using everyday experiences to drive home his points. His work is accessible for the everyday investor looking for advice to get moving right away. Extensive research and sage insight coupled with skilled narrative spells a unique and one-of-a-kind experience you'll want to keep coming back to. Thank you, Derek. That almost sounds like the review of some sort of musical theater, right? Or something you'd see in the paper. Spells a unique and one-of-a-kind experience you'll want to keep coming back to. I really appreciate those kind words, Derek. Shoot me an email, jesse@bestinterest.blog, and we will get you hooked up with some best interest gear, that aforementioned t-shirt. And before I invite Justin on today, I wanted to use today's monologue. It's going to be a little bit different. Not necessarily a deep dive into a personal finance or investing topic. I want to talk about the business of the best interest. In other words, the business model. How the best interest makes money, if it even makes money at all. And the reason why I'm bringing it up is a few folds, I suppose. One, because I get asked. Some of you reach out occasionally and say, hey, Jesse, I noticed you weren't running advertisements. So I'm just curious, how does the best interest actually make money? Others of you reach out on occasion and you want to find ways to support me. You say, hey, Jesse, do you have a Patreon that I can donate to? Do you have a paid newsletter that I can subscribe to? And then ultimately, after you hear my answer to these questions today, you might realize that your help is very much welcome. I don't want to say that your help is needed per se. I don't think your help is needed, but it is so welcome. So I want to answer those kinds of questions today. And the fact is, as I've mentioned before on the podcast, I would be doing this for free. In fact, I did it for free for 3 years. The beginning of the best interest was while I was still working as an engineer, and really there was no financial benefit whatsoever to me running the podcast or writing the blog. But also at the time, it wasn't exactly expensive to run. And I was just throwing out some free information onto the internet, seeing what stuck. And in fact, if I didn't switch careers, and I'll talk more about the career switch because it's pretty instrumental today. If I didn't switch careers, I would still be a DIYer. Like many of you, I would be making my own investing decisions. I do my own research on tax optimization and cash flow management, build my own monthly net worth statements, all that kind of stuff. I wouldn't probably write my own legal documents per se, but I'd investigate my own estate planning, understand what kind of beneficiary setups I needed and who I needed to talk about writing the will, all that kind of stuff. DIYer, right? That's the DIYer way. Now, I think it's important, though, to admit to ourselves that not everyone in our lives wants to be a DIYer. And that was a big realization that I had in the process of running the best interest over the past 5 years. I came into the project a little bit from the financial independence space where I'd learned all this really cool information all on my own, started applying it in practice all on my own. But for people to learn that stuff and apply it in their own lives, some people want to do that all on their own. I want to contribute to that, which is a big reason why I run the best interest. But what I've learned along the way, sending this info out there to you guys in cyberspace, is that some people, they find it interesting, they're happy to read it, but for one reason or another, they don't necessarily want to implement it in their own lives themselves. And we'll talk about a few of those reasons. One reason, quite simply, is some people don't really like personal finance and investing. They're probably not listening to this podcast right now, let's be honest. Some people love it. Many of you who are listening probably love it. Some people are just very comfortable with math, others not so much. Some people like spreadsheets and calculators and doing their own inflation adjustments. Other people don't. Another big differentiator, I suppose, some people are just very comfortable with probabilities. Like when I look at the investing world, when I look at long-term investing, I know the odds are tilted in my favor. I don't see it like a casino. I see it much differently. And I'm very, very comfortable playing games where the odds are tilted in my favor. I don't necessarily need 100% odds. I don't need a guarantee. I just need the odds tilted in my favor, and I can figure out how to size my own bets accordingly. I feel very comfortable in that kind of probabilistic space, but not everybody does. And many people, they realize that it's important in their life to get this stuff right, but they want someone else to drive the bus. Some people, they want to drive the bus themselves. Others want to be driven. And that's another idea that we'll come back to. The fact that for many of you, and just like I am, we're very comfortable being DIYers, but not everybody is that comfortable. And just as a quick aside, because I mentioned before about the cost of the best interest, last year, the best interest cost about $7,000 to operate. Now that's web hosting costs and a MailChimp email subscription. There's some de minimis stuff in there. I have this awesome podcast production team that makes these episodes sound amazing. They've saved me so much time in the process. And yeah, they charge me because they do really good work. And all those little things add up to about $7,000 to operate the business last year. And as much fun as it is to run the best interest, I don't necessarily want it to be this $7,000 loss from now until the end of time. The traditional models for how websites or podcasts make money, well, we have the advertising model. That's a very common one. And many of you will be familiar with that advertising model. The idea simply is that somehow I gain your attention, I get your eyeballs, I get your ears, and then I sell you something. I sell you a product that might not even have anything to do with the podcast itself. I might sell you mattresses or vitamin mixes or something like that. I don't really like that. My issue with the advertising model, and I'm certainly not alone here, if you're familiar with social media in general, you'll know how insidious the advertising model can be because it incentivizes whatever behavior drives more eyeballs and gets more clicks and more listens. The advertising model incentivizes a behavior that I don't necessarily want. I want to deliver signal, but not noise. The advertising model says, well, if noise is what gets people's attention, then you should deliver that noise. You should be outrageous. You might need to be mean. You might need to be rude. Literally last night, I watched an HBO documentary about Alex Jones, his talk show, his focus on the Sandy Hook tragedy, and his vitriolic opinions about the Sandy Hook tragedy. And the connection between those opinions of his and his ability to get eyeballs and ears because of his opinions, and then his ability to sell supplements and products to that audience he'd built. That was his business model. And when Jones was sued for defamation in civil court, it was proven that the more vitriolic he got, the more products he sold. And that kind of feedback loop leads down a terrible path. And I insist upon avoiding that path. Now, there are some personal finance creators, some old, some new, but when you watch them, you say to yourself, that person's kind of being a dick. The reason why, quite often, is because it has to do with the way they get paid. Part of the way they get paid is the advertising model. And if they can attract more attention to their channel through that behavior, then they can sell more and they can earn more. They can sell ads. That's just not something that I want to pursue here. Okay, well, another very viable model in the content creation space is subscriptions, meaning you would have to pay to listen to this podcast or you'd have to pay to subscribe to my blog. I did think about that. I think there are some places out there that do a subscription model very, very well. I understand it, but I don't really want to pursue that. I want this information to be free in the public domain. So I wanted to lean away from subscriptions or upfront paywalls. Then another common revenue model is products or courses. Yes, there is a book that I wrote that you can find on Amazon, and I'll say that I'm about 90% proud of that book. The whole idea of the book was I had 30 different contributors write 30 different chapters, and most of those chapters I think are great. There's a couple chapters that in hindsight, not exactly proud of. But long story short, I don't want book sales to be a part of my business model. I don't want to be here on every episode saying, hey, buy my book. And it's similar with courses. Courses can be a terrific business model, a paid course, I suppose, to educate you all listening, but I don't necessarily want to be out here shilling books or courses and products. So I'll stop bearing the lead at this point, and I'll just get to the meat and potatoes of the conversation. Now, many of you know that for the past 2 years and 4 months, and I'm recording this here in early April of 2024, I've been working for a fiduciary wealth management firm here in my hometown, Rochester, New York. The firm is called Cobblestone Capital Advisors. We work with about 900 families and manage close to $3 billion of their assets, providing detailed financial planning and investment management along the way. Our company is about 41 employees in size, all here in Rochester, and we're independently owned, meaning, we're not tied to a Schwab or Fidelity. We're not owned by some large corporation or a private equity firm or anything like that. The owners of my business, well, they sit right down the hall from me. And therefore, we get full say in how we treat our clients, how we help them, what investments are in their best interest, et cetera, et cetera. And that investment philosophy lines up very closely with everything we talk about here on The Best Interest. 6 of my colleagues are certified financial planners, CFPs, with 2 more in training. That's the highest designation in financial planning. 5 are chartered financial analysts, CFAs, with 2 more in training. And that's the highest and hardest designation in investment management and investment analysis. 3 of my colleagues are CPA accountants, which requires, a college degree unto itself and then a challenging exam. And then 1 of my colleagues is an attorney, a former trust estate and taxation attorney who now works full-time for us. So these are smart people, credentialed people that I personally get to learn so much from, and which is fantastic in and of itself, much of which eventually gets distilled down and shared with you guys here on The Best Interest. And we bring that kind of objective, diverse expertise to bear in the clients that we work with. So my role in that mix is that I work with clients directly. I get to know them, understand their goals in life, and understand how they got here in life and where they want to go with their finances. So I listen to their financial situations, their wins and their losses, and the hard numbers involved. And then between myself and the planning team and the investing team and everyone I'm surrounded with here, we put together a financial plan for those clients, often looking 10 or 20 or 30 years out in the future. We make investing decisions based on that plan to help them execute the plan to reach their goals, to end up where they want to end up. And over time, the idea is that we execute that plan so our clients can lead the life that they want to live. And so here's a quick example with some details changed because we do take confidentiality very seriously with our clients. I was referred a client by a Best Interest listener. This lady's in her early 60s, and she came to us with $1.1 million. Some of it was taxable, some qualified in an IRA, but all $1.1 million were invested into annuities. Those annuity fees, on average, were about 2.5% per year. And the annuities, since the time she bought them in 2009, had grown by about 3.9% per year. So the total return over 14 years had been 22%. That's about 1.4% compounded for 14 years. And again, that's 1.4% annual growth during one of the greatest bull markets in history. Now, granted, we should probably pause and ask ourselves, well, this woman, she owned annuities. Did she own them because of her risk tolerance? She bought them in 2009, right after the great financial crisis. Was she sold annuities because annuities hold their value? There's no risk of losing money there. Well, I'd argue, and I think you might argue too, that this woman paid an enormous price in terms of opportunity cost and opportunity lost. She missed out on part of the greatest bull market in history. If we compare over that same time period, a simple 60-40 portfolio returned about 8.9% per year, a 50-50 portfolio, 7.8% per year, and even a more conservative 40-60 portfolio returned 6.7% per year over that same time period. In one of those very simple, basic, diversified portfolios, her total returns would have been in the range of 150% to 225%. And instead, she got 22% growth. So now that this woman is approaching retirement and Social Security age, we're also helping answer questions for her on the financial planning front. It's not just about investment management, it's also about financial planning. What is the optimal time for her to start taking Social Security? What's the best order for her of withdrawals from her various accounts to help her fund her monthly income needs while keeping her tax bill optimized? Should we go to IRA first, her taxable account, a little bit of both? And she'll have to start taking RMDs in a decade or so. So we're thinking about that right now. She's making small Roth conversions during these years. It's a topic we recently talked about on the blog. Her tax liability is quite low right now. So we're taking advantage of that by making small Roth conversions right now that in the long run will absolutely make sense for her. So you listening to this story, you probably never would have bought the annuity in the first place. And you might be doing that kind of planning work that I just reviewed all on your own. But I hope you'll recognize that someone who owned an annuity for the past 15 years probably needs a fiduciary financial planning firm to help them understand what the best path forward is for them right now. And for that person, the idea of, hey, just DIY it, that's probably an unrealistic idea. So the same kind of stuff that I'm preaching here on The Best Interest, I put into practice with my clients on a daily basis. How do we marry these various topics that we've been talking about today? Well, in the past 2 years, about 10 different readers and listeners have reached out to me to either speak with me about their own lives, about working with me professionally at Cobblestone, or to refer a friend or a family in their life to come work here. I take the fiduciary role very seriously. And sometimes the right answer for these referrals has been, hey, you wouldn't get enough benefit from Cobblestone. I truly think you should do exactly what you're already doing. Or maybe I think there's another financial planner out there who's a better fit for what you're looking for. And let me introduce you to someone else. But for a few people, there's been a great fit, just a perfect relationship where they found out about me through the best interest. They reached out to learn more about Cobblestone. We do exactly what they're looking for. It's a great fit for us. It's a great fit for them. I and my colleagues are able to provide organization and planning and execution to help them get their financial lives on track. And I understand if you're listening to this podcast right now, that's probably not you, right? Most of you, those of you I know are listening to this, you enjoy the DIY process. You want to build your own investment portfolio and open your own accounts and do your own tax planning, et cetera, et cetera. You want to make your own decisions on those nitty-gritty details. But like my client I mentioned before with the annuities, that's not everybody. Not everybody wants to be a DIYer. In fact, I truly believe that to allow some people to kind of flounder in the DIY space is a disservice to them. It is an important truth that I've realized over the many years that I've been running the best interest. And it's one of the main reasons why I changed careers in the first place. Even the most dedicated DIY readers and listeners might want a second opinion. Typically for them, typically for you listening, hiring an hourly planner might be the right move for you, but not for this annuity owning client that I mentioned before. The reason goes back to a fundamental Vanguard study that looked at the pros and the cons of hiring a financial planner in the first place. They found that by far, the biggest value add in a financial planner is preventing behavioral mistakes. In other words, stopping clients from doing stupid things in their portfolios. Hourly planners are wonderful in that they provide a roadmap, and then they set you off on your own to follow that map. It's very hard, though, to prevent someone from choosing to deviate from that map. And when markets are acting up in either direction, right, the highs or the lows, it can be tempting to change course and leave your map. Now, if you're a dedicated map follower, many of us here are, no worries. Hourly planning is right for you. But we all know that friend from college or the great aunt or the colleague who would quickly deviate from the map if left to their own devices. And one of the best skills that I can offer my clients is not only providing the map, but also providing deep fundamental education to convince them to stay on the map. For many people who have come to me wanting to become clients, some of them want to offload the entire process onto someone else. They have incredibly busy lives. They don't want to make mistakes along the way, and it's worthwhile for them, both in terms of return on investment and peace of mind, to pay someone else to outsource that work to. Or maybe they just want a safety net in place for their spouse in case something happens to them. That's a very common story. They're very comfortable being a DIYer themselves, but whether it's a health reason or a sudden unexpected loss or for whatever the reason is, they want a safety net in place because their spouse is not a DIYer and their spouse wants to lean on a trusted professional in case something happens to the DIYer spouse. Or maybe they just want someone else to drive the bus for a little while they ride shotgun to see how things go and then to reevaluate. Those are many of the different types of people who I serve, who I work with, and that in my mind gets back to the business model of the best interest. I want to continue giving away this kind of helpful, true advice for free to anyone and everyone who wants to hear it. And I also professionally offer a service, a paid service that I do in the real professional world to people who want that good advice implemented in their own lives. But they don't want to do it DIY. They don't want to navigate the map all on their own. I think there might be people in your lives listening right now. There might be people in your lives who would benefit from this kind of help. And if you know them, I hope you'll consider connecting them with me. I hope you'll talk about who I am and what I do. Maybe you'll send them the podcast so they can listen to themselves. And if they're comfortable, you'll reach out to me, send me an email or a LinkedIn message, and you'll say, hey, I have someone in mind who I think you should talk to about Cobblestone. If you're looking to support the best interest, I don't want to spam you with ads for mattresses. I don't want to beg for your donations, but I do enjoy putting in the work. I do want to provide valuable, hard work, financial planning, wealth management, investment advice to you or your friends or your loved ones, someone in your life. I hope you'll trust me with that. I was listening to a podcast the other day. It was a Sam Harris podcast, and he was talking with the founder of the TED Talk conferences about the struggle between doing something that's good for the world, building up that kind of trust, and then asking others for money for that thing. And the question came up in their conversation, should you feel bad for asking for money? And I thought about it. And ultimately, my thoughts aligned with what Sam Harris and his interview guest said, which is, I know I'm providing value here, value to thousands of you listening, value to my clients. I know I'm working hard on everyone's behalf, and I don't think there's anything wrong with getting paid to provide that value. So thank you for listening and spreading this podcast far and wide. It's so much fun for me to sit here behind the microphone and let alone to watch it grow. Has been awesome. Absolutely fantastic. But like I said, last year, there was maybe $7,000 in operating costs between the blog and the podcast and the newsletter. And as much fun as it is, I don't want it to be a charity. So again, if someone in your life needs the kind of help that we talk about here, but that person has no interest in being a true DIYer and implementing it on their own, you can support me, you can support the best interest, and I think you can do right by that person by introducing them to me. I take that idea very seriously. If they're a good fit for what I do at Cobblestone, the kind of work that we do here, I want to help them. But if they're not a good fit, or if they just wouldn't get enough benefit from it, I want to inform them of that and point them in a useful, better direction. So if you've wondered what my business model here is on the best interest, that's your answer. If you want to support me that way, thank you so much. And if not, no worries at all. I'm so glad you're here listening, and I want to keep on creating content for you. Thank you. Here's a quick ad, and then we'll get back to the show. Every week, I send a quick free email to thousands of readers that shares 3 simple things. 1, my new articles and podcasts. 2, the best financial content of the week from all over the internet. And 3, a financial chart that explains some important concept in the news that week. It's a great primer to boost your financial know-how.
But Jesse, I don't want another email.
Well, this might not be for you, but I do hear you, which is why I make it very short, sweet, and full of only the essentials. A whopping 66% of subscribers read my email at least once a month. They're enjoying it, and maybe you will too. You can subscribe for free on the homepage at bestinterest.blog. Again, that's a free, no-strings-attached subscription at bestinterest.blog. So let's transition to today's interview. Today's interview is a little bit different. It's far more of a two-way conversation and a very entertaining one at that. I invited Justin Peters to join me. Justin is a good friend, a financial educator in his own right, and he's the host of the Struggle is Real podcast, which is aimed towards 20-somethings and covering all manner of important young adult topics, although recently, Justin has really been honing in on personal finance and financial independence. Justin has been kind enough to invite me on the Struggle is Real 3 times now. And by the way, Justin and his brother Kyle run a company called SimplePod Studios that does all of my podcast production. The reason why the podcast sounds good as it does, and it does include all my stutters and all the times that I curse because I flub a line, is because Justin and Kyle and their team, they edit it all out. So thank you guys. As you'll hear, Justin's combination of conversational skills and financial expertise makes him the perfect sparring partner for this conversation, where we compare and contrast our top 5 golden rules of personal finance. Justin Peters, thanks for coming on the Best Interest podcast. How you doing, man?
I'm doing great, man. This is such an honor and privilege to be on the show, man. I've been a longtime listener and a fan of yours for quite a while, so thanks for inviting me.
You're welcome. And I did just give you an intro where I talked about the struggle is real. I talked about the fact that we're business partners the right way, or is it kind of a client and an expert relationship where you and your brother Kyle help me with the podcast editing and everything that listeners hear every week has your fingerprints on it. So very, very cool to have you on the podcast.
I guess client and peer or client relationship, but also I look at you as a peer, man. I follow a lot of what you do, and I feel like you and I pick each other's brains on
right,
what's happening in the world of podcasting. So yeah, definitely just as much a peer as a client to me.
Awesome. And we have a really fun episode today, I think, Justin. And the quick backstory for everybody is I watch English soccer, and on some of these English soccer shows, they have this really cool format where they'll ask 2 panelists to independently come up with a list. And then live on air, they'll have those panelists and maybe some other commentators compare and contrast and criticize or promote one another's lists. And it'll be, who are the best 11 players in English soccer right now? And each person will come up with their list and their reasons, and then they'll compare and debate live on air. And so we're going to do something similar today. I asked Justin to come up with his top 5 golden rules of personal finance and investing. I did the same. Plus, we added in some honorable mentions because maybe Justin's number 5 will be my number 8, and that's worth talking about. But then here, live on the podcast, we are going to reveal each other's lists. I haven't seen Justin's. Justin hasn't seen mine. And then we're going to talk about it. And we're going to talk through why we think the things we think, why we don't think the things we don't think. Hopefully it's fun, and also maybe sheds a little light or a little education on our opinions, and maybe that'll help you in some little way. What do you think of all that, Justin?
I think this is a great idea. As soon as you pitched me on this idea, I was like, yes, I am down for it. I'm so stoked for it. I think we might have a little overlap here, but I'm also interested where you and I have a little bit of disagreement in it. So let's get into it.
Right. Perfect. Well, As the guest, I feel like I have to ask you to go first, Justin. And then we can snake back and forth like they do it in a fantasy football draft. Why don't you start with your number 5?
My number 5 or my number 1? Should I work up or down?
That's a good question. What do you think's the best?
I think we should work down because I think we're going to have some overlap here at the beginning. And then I think we're going to start to differentiate near the bottom of the list.
That's fair. That's totally fair. Okay, let's do it. Start with your number 1.
I think number 1 is spend less than you earn. I think you actually mentioned it as one of your golden rules of personal finance in one of your blog posts, essentially living below your means. And if you want to bolt on one of our good friends, Jeremy Schneider's, to it's spend less than you earn and invest the difference. So however you want to do this, if it's creating a budget or whatnot, I think cash flow is so important in the world of personal finance. And I definitely think that's my number 1 rule whenever I look at the top 5 golden rules of personal finance.
I largely agree. I think I wrote the rule slightly differently, but the rule that I wrote for number 1 is you must measure. And really what I was talking about there is cash flow with maybe a little asterisk next to it of also net worth statements, that kind of thing. But the idea being that you've got to measure your monthly cash flow. You have to know how much you are spending. You have to know how much you're earning. You have to know that cash flow is positive on a monthly basis, because everything else that you do in your financial life is a function of, do you have extra money on a monthly or bi-monthly or quarterly basis to do those things with? Every vacation that you spend is saved from positive monthly cash flow. Every time we put $500 a month into our Roth IRA, it's because we have the extra cash flow to do that. So earning more than you spend, spending less than you earn, measuring your cash flow, I agree, is the most important golden rule of personal finance.
Is that one of the very first things you do with new clients? I'm guessing it would have to be. Can you make subsequent decisions without really thinking through this very first one?
One of the first things we do with new clients is we ask them for their big 4. And their big 4 are assets and liabilities. And that's to be able to put together a net worth statement. And then we ask them for monthly income and monthly expenses, or annual income and annual expenses. And that's so that we can start to do cash flow planning for them. We supply them with a tool. It's called eMoney. Fidelity originally developed eMoney, which is similar in some ways to any sort of budgeting or cash flow tool that you've experienced before. But yeah, it is absolutely fundamental. And ideally, we capture all that information from our clients before a pencil hits a paper and we do the first bit of work, because you need to know all those different puzzle pieces before you can start putting the puzzle together.
Makes total sense. And then I think I know you personally too, but I'm guessing, are you a measure every dollar type of person? Like something comes in, something comes out, you have some kind of transaction on a ledger?
So my old school approach, especially before Kelly and I combined finances, was very much that. Very, very much that. Now, I actually use eMoney myself because it's pretty easy. You can link accounts and it's all automated. It's got a lot of that nice functionality to it. Technically speaking, eMoney does measure every single dollar, but there are definitely times where it'll miscategorize something or do something a little like that. And because it takes a lot of the automation on itself, I don't have to log in that often to check it. So I'll log in twice a month, say, and just look at what's happened recently, make sure that everything makes sense, make sure that all the transactions are real and justified. And sometimes it sparks some conversations between Kelly and I about, we spent this and why do we spend that kind of thing. So in some ways, I guess I'm still measuring every single dollar, but it doesn't feel quite as intensive as the old way I did it. What do you do, Justin?
I'm still old school spreadsheet, measure everything at the end of the month, pull up my statements and go through everything and add it in by hand, I guess, but by keyboard, and then categorize it myself there. I have given myself some grace. Like cash was always an issue for me if I do a cash transaction. Totally. And I finally have been like, you know what? I'm no longer recording those. I'd like track them in a note. And then at the end of the month, I would add those in or something. And I'm like, Justin, you are far enough along in your financial journey that you do no longer have to do that. I might make 4 or 5 cash transactions a month. It's just not worth it to me anymore. But yeah, I still track everything.
How long have you been doing that for?
Oh man, I bet 10 years. I bet I can pull spreadsheets back from pretty far.
Do you feel like if you stopped doing it today, would that negatively affect your actual spending? Like you'd spend more accidentally and it would actually negatively impact your financial life? Or would it just have a negative effect on kind of your financial anxiety, for lack of a better term?
I think the latter. I think this is actually a really good question. I think I would probably be the exact same spender if I tracked or didn't track. There might be a few things fraud, for example, or transactions that were over what I expected, there are some things that I pick up that I'm like, oh, I need to question that, or that actually belongs somewhere else. But no, I feel like I have some pretty good spending habits already. It's one of my superpowers in the world of personal finance. I'm not really sure it would change if I didn't or did track my monthly expenses.
I feel the same exact way. I think I spent 6 or 7 years using YNAB, You Need a Budget, religiously. And when I stopped using it, I still spend the same amount. I'm still hesitant to spend on certain things. I still love spending on these other things. I still save for the big expenditures the same exact way. But I will say the part that affected me was just not quite knowing. And that was the part where I had a little knot in my stomach about not knowing where my money was going. Whereas now, at least what I'm doing now, I feel like is this happy medium where I still at the end of the month get very clear knowledge on what we've spent and how we've spent it. But I'm not necessarily in the weeds, and I'm not doing it on a, multiple times a week, logging in to make sure that my accounts are all reconciled, anything like that.
I will say it does help at the end of the year to kind of look back, and I just put up all of my vendors and my spending categories, sort them highest to lowest. And then I just start thinking through each one. Is there a way that I can reduce this cost or this spend? Even like gift cards. Like my dad's like, they like to give me gift cards for Christmas. So I'll just like go and like, where do I spend my money? Okay, those are the gift cards I'm going to ask for. And that's a really silly and nuanced example, but it does help me kind of do a kind of end of the year recap. And I'm like, oh, my insurance was up. Maybe I need to call my broker and just see if he can do anything there. Internet, seems to be climbing, or that's number 5 on my line item. Like I'll go and I'll do a couple of proactive things knowing where some of my big budget spending is.
Have I ever told you some would call it frugal, some would call it smart, some might call it cheapskate. That's okay. But my gift card hack, for lack of a better term?
No, I would love to hear because I have way too many gift cards.
And I'm going to put it in the form of a question, not only for you, but for the audience. Because if you get a gift card to say Red Lobster or Cheesecake Factory or whatever, even your favorite restaurant in Austin, what's likely to happen is you're going to go there and you are going to spend money at that restaurant that maybe you wouldn't have otherwise have spent. And therefore, it's very nice because it was a gift from someone and you're getting a great meal. And I don't want to discount that. But purely from a personal finance point of view, it might not have actually helped your financial life that much because it encouraged you to spend money that maybe otherwise I wouldn't have gone to Red Lobster unless I had this gift card and now I'm here. So the question is, what are the things in life that you only buy when you need and you never spend more money than what you need? And for me, that answer is gasoline. I only buy it when I need it, and I never spend $1 more on gasoline than what's needed for my car right there. The reason why I bring this all up is my bank gives these reward points, and I can convert the reward points to Amazon gift cards or Target gift cards or miles. I can also convert it to Mobil or Sunoco or other gas company gas cards. And that's usually what I do because it literally is as good as real money because I spend real money on gas only as much as I need and never a red penny more.
It's so funny you mentioned that because the most routine gift card that I asked from my dad is Quick Trip, which is a popular gas station in the Midwest and coming down south now. And it's like the one gift card that always exits my wallet. And it's funny that you mentioned Red Lobster. I've had this Red Lobster gift card for like 2 years. And my girlfriend and I finally are like, hey, like every other Friday, we're going to pick one of the gift cards and we're going to use one of these gift cards as like a date night. And we hit Red Lobster 2 weeks ago and we're like, all right, we got to go to Red Lobster. Yeah. And you're right. Honestly, we spent more on Red Lobster than we wanted to because with the gift card strategy, it's like you either need to spend right up to the allocated amount, but right under it, and then just kind of toss the excess on it because I'm not going to go back to Red Lobster and spend the $4.37 that's left on the gift card. Or you overspend, so you cover all of the gift card, but then you're left kind of forking out whatever the overage is. And that's what happened. I was like, why did I end up spending $14 at Red Lobster when I walked in with a $50 gift card? It didn't make any sense to me.
The subject line should either be genius or cheapskate. And you can send those emails to jesse@bestinterest.blog and you can CC Justin from SimplePod Studios. Justin, we'll just say it now and we'll also say it at the end. What email should people CC you on when they send these genius cheapskate emails?
Justin at SimplePod Studios. I think that's a good one.
Perfect. All right, Justin, let's go on to our second golden rule of personal finance. Now, some of my rules, I'll admit, they aren't maybe as nitty gritty as they could be. And whereas maybe some of yours are more, we'll see as we go on. And that might be just a little bit of a difference between the way we approach this problem independently. But my second rule is that you must invest in knowledge and in yourself.
That's funny. I have that as number 5. More so because, once again, I was kind of looking at this from 1 to 5 and thinking I would say that one last. I would actually probably put that one as my number 2 as well. And I put your tagline on here, an investment in knowledge pays the best interest, just because I think it's so good. But yes, I wholeheartedly agree with that. That I don't think there's a whole lot of disagreement in this area. Both of you and I are personal finance educators. We both love learning and sharing what we learn with other people. And I think the way to progress in your personal finance is to be continually learning. You even talked about it, I think, in a recent monologue too. You lose a little luster of the whole personal finance game after you start to optimize and you've learned all of these things and you put it into place. But if you continue to learn and put yourself out there, you'll continue to get better and better when it comes to money.
Yeah, I think I was saying how there's some boring topics now, or topics that I certainly found boring like a few years ago, that in the last few years, I'm like, oh, like the tax code is actually kind of interesting. And, we all have to pay taxes. It's part of our civic duty, I think, to pay taxes. But we also, as taxpayers, have a right to not pay more taxes than we should. And it's about finding that balance. And the tax code is kind of like this game where you've got rules and you've got laws and you've got lots of different pieces, different options, different strategies. And it's kind of about putting together your game plan this year and for all years in the future so that you pay the right amount of taxes, the fair amount of taxes for you. And I think that's interesting. It's a little bit boring, but it's something I've learned about. I chose to learn about.
I actually really liked that you brought up the tax code because I've recently been getting into it more and more. And I do find there's so much information I had no idea about, especially now running my own business over the last 2 years. And that opened up a whole nother, pulled back the curtain and I saw a whole nother world of personal finance that I didn't know a lot about. So I enjoyed learning about it. And my favorite topics that I get to prep for and interview on my show are usually the topics I don't know much about. Like I got to do student loans a couple of years ago, and I never really managed or had to deal with my own student loans, but doing a deep dive into student loans got me really stoked about just learning and personal finance in general. I've really actually kind of been enjoying learning a little bit about the tax code recently.
Yeah. Something that was eye-opening for me, and for our younger listeners, it might not affect you for a while, but for the older listeners, it'll affect you soon or might be affecting you right now. It's really interesting how much retirement income can be subject to very low, if not 0% tax brackets. And it's very interesting the way that different forms of retirement income interact, where you can have earning a few more dollars over here. Not only is that a taxable event in and of itself, but it also might make other forms of income now taxable. The basic example being Social Security, right? A lot of Social Security for a lot of retirees is actually not taxable at the federal level, depending on your overall income. So someone can be in situation A where they're really not paying much tax on their Social Security income. Oh, but if they decide to take a withdrawal from their IRA, not only is that withdrawal itself considered taxable income, but it has now qualified more of the Social Security that was previously not taxed. The federal government, the IRS, will now consider that Social Security taxable. That's a very common scenario, but something that I think a lot of people don't realize. And the rabbit hole only goes deeper from there. But Anyway, I digress. The idea of investing in that kind of knowledge or investing in yourself, like developing your own skills in some way, which then kind of segues into potentially increasing your income over time because you've been investing in yourself and investing in your skills, is a huge part of this personal finance investing journey.
Yeah, I think the quote to summarize this, your income can only grow to the extent that you do. So
I like that.
And so much of what I talk about on my show, because we speak to 20-somethings, is increasing your income. And such a big portion of that is becoming more valuable. Therefore, to become more valuable, you have to increase your skill set. A lot of what I love to talk about is learning and growth. And I think that's super important outside of even the context of personal finance.
Agreed. So what was your number 2, Justin?
My number 2 was don't invest in anything you don't understand.
Ooh, and I like it.
I think there might be some nuance in this, so I'd be curious to see if you have any pushback on this. And I think we probably have to put a few definitions or bumpers on something, because Can someone ever truly understand the complete scope of what they're investing in? Probably not. If I'm investing in some kind of index fund, do I understand entire mechanics of that index fund? No, probably not. Do I understand the balance statements or the business model of every business that's included in that index fund? No, probably not. But what I meant by this is that I think you need to understand at least the high level mechanics of how something is going to make you money and what are the potential pitfalls of investing in this certain business or property or equity or whatever asset we might be talking about. And I think from a personal standpoint, this is where I've gotten myself in trouble. So I hired, I say financial advisor, really insurance salesperson early on in my investing journey, because I didn't know how to invest. I thought I heard so many people say, you need to go hire a financial advisor, you need to go get help. And I got introduced to someone at a company that I probably shouldn't mention so that this doesn't get taken down. But if I said the company, you would know this company. And I didn't realize, I thought they were someone that was looking out for my own good. But, after I started learning more and more about personal finance and I started to ask better and better questions to this salesman, I started to realize they don't have my best interest. And I think I'm actually out equipping them whenever it comes to knowledge and what's best for me. And I got stuck in some kind of life insurance policy, which kind of looks like an infinite banking product. And it was egregious. I think I ended up putting in about $15,000. And by the time I pulled it back and tried to get as much money out of it as I could, so I could just go into more simple, diversified investment products, I came out with like $1,200. And, there was much promise about, how much this is going to pay me out in my 60s and 70s. But I was just looking at the fee schedule. I was looking about the complexity of how that product paid, and I fully didn't understand it. Like if someone challenged me and asked me to explain it to them, how I was making and generating money and how I was going to get money and what were the pitfalls of this product, I wouldn't have been able to tell you. Therefore, that should have been a full stop for me. I shouldn't have invested in that product, at least at that time, until I started asking more questions and getting more educated in that.
That's a really powerful example and a fortunate example, but thanks for sharing with us. Thanks for sharing with the audience. And thankfully, again, in the big scheme of things, hopefully, I hope, and you hope one day you'll be able to look back on that and say, that was a $14,000 lesson that sucks, but thankfully it was only $14,000, not 140 or 1.4 million. Because those are some of the mistakes that people end up making later on with bigger sums of money in a similar way. I don't have something quite as succinct as you put it on my list, but it doesn't mean that I disagree with how important it is to invest in what you know. I loved your example of the index fund and how you don't have to understand the underlying mechanics of every company in the index fund, but you should have an understanding of something I might end up talking about soon on another podcast. And maybe I've talked about on my own podcast before, is this investing framework that is an acronym and deserves a shortcut, but it's, RRTTLLU. I don't know if I've ever talked about this before with you, Justin. So it's, again, RRTTLLU. Maybe you can pronounce it Rudy Lou. I'm not sure, but it's risk, return, taxes, timeline, legal, liquidity, and unique situations. And the idea is for any investment, you should be able to go through that and understand both for the investment and then also how the investment how it fits into your overall portfolio. What's the risk? What's the return, the expected return? What are the tax implications? What's the timeline, your personal timeline, or just the timeline that the investment has on it where it's going to give you that return that was promised? Are there any legal implications of the investment? Do you have any liquidity concerns, or is the investment very liquid or not liquid at all? And then are there any unique kind of asterisks there? And I think for the typical listener right now, for you and I, for the person who's investing in index funds, it's a simple enough product, for lack of a better term, that we can go through bit by bit and answer those questions for an index fund. When someone has shared their whole life policy with me before, or they've said like, hey, Jesse, this insurance salesperson is trying to get me to invest in this universal index life. Like, what's going on? It's challenging for me to go through that RRTTLLU framework and understand exactly what's going on.
I don't know. And I'm not saying you can never invest in these things, but you should understand them beforehand. Yeah. And more times than not in the world of personal finance, simple is better than complex.
Agreed. I love that rule. That's another rule that could be on the top 5, top 10. Here's a quick ad, and then we'll get back to the show. Serious question. Why do podcasters constantly ask for ratings and reviews? Yes, they do help highlight our shows to new listeners. They help strangers find us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. It's totally true and a good reason to ask for ratings and reviews. But I have something more important, at least more important to me. I want to know if you like this stuff. I want to know if you like my podcast episodes, my monologues, my guests, the information I share with you and the stories I tell. I want to improve and make your listening more enjoyable in the process. So yeah, I would love to read your reviews. And sure, if you throw a rating in there too, that's great. If you like what I'm doing, please share it with me. It's such a great feeling to read your feedback. I'd love to read your review or see a rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Thank you.
Number 3, a little bit more generic, but cover your risk. And of course, I'm talking about insurance here, term, life, health, auto, all of the things. And then e-funds, emergency funds. And I thought your recent episode with Brian, what's his last name? Yep, Feraldi. He did a really good job telling me why it's important to cover your risk. And someone that is a risk taker, at least in the context of how he invests, he simply said, like, I can be a little bit more aggressive whenever it comes to investing because I have taken care of this whole other world of personal finance for me. I have a budget. I have an emergency fund. I have insurance products that protect me against potential risk. And you were saying it too in a recent monologue too. If you don't have the asset to cover your potential liability, you might need insurance. So I thought that was just really good to be thinking about what are some of the risk out there and how can you counter correct or plan if that risk comes up, even if it is a 1 in 10,000 or 1 in 1 million chance, it's still worth considering. And is there some asset that you currently own that you can deploy against it? Great. If not, it might be worth considering buying insurance on top of that.
I was going to break that quote out. You beat me to it. That's exactly right. And it's so funny. There was I think it was on Choose FI's Facebook page recently. Someone was asking about pet insurance. And pet insurance is a really interesting one because with pet insurance, some pet owners out there, I totally understand it. I mean, Kelly and I, we love our dog, Sadie. And some pet owners out there, they love their animals so much that if their animal needed a $100,000 surgery to give it another couple years of life, they would try their hardest to find a way to make that surgery happen. And there are other pet owners who would face with that same situation. They would say, yeah, you know what, Scruffy's had a great life. He's had 10 years with us and we love him very much. But we can't justify a $100,000 surgery to give Scruffy another couple years of life. I think both of those are very understandable. I understand the emotions. I understand the brass tack finances. But when getting back to pet insurance, that first example, the person who is willing to spend $100,000 on Scruffy's surgery, that person probably needs pet insurance because that is such a large outlay of money that it's probably going to do some serious damages to their personal finances. And if they're paying $60 a month for pet insurance, which they can build into their budget and they can build their life around $60 a month of pet insurance, well, now Scruffy surgery might be covered. Whereas the second family who they say, yeah, we can't do it. We can't justify that surgery. They might not need pet insurance because they're going to be better off saying, you know what, the $200 visits, the odd, Scruffy ate a tennis ball and now he needs to get endoscopied and pull it out. And it's going to be $500. Okay, maybe they can cover that from their normal spending, but they're going to have some point where they say, this is too high a dollar value. We aren't going to do it. And they might not need insurance in that case. You can apply that logic to anything in your life, whether it's your own life, like life insurance. Well, if you died, would your family need some sort of compensation in order to continue their lifestyle? For a lot of people with dependents, the answer is yes, which is why they probably should have life insurance. If you don't have any dependents, the answer is probably no. And you probably shouldn't have life insurance, et cetera, et cetera. So I really like that. I think insurance is kind of an underrated topic, partly because some parts of the insurance industry have kind of a tilt your head at exactly what they're doing. But yeah, I like that that's on your list, Justin.
What do you got for number 3?
So my number 3 is focus on the big stuff. Housing, transportation, your spouse, those kind of things. So you must focus on the big stuff. I mean, we were talking about budgets earlier. And when you look at the typical budget, whether it's your personal budget or your household budget, and you see where your money is going, housing, transportation, and food are the top 3, usually by far for most households. And then we've all heard it before, but who you choose to spend your life with and what their personal financial habits are what their assets and liabilities are, kind of what situation you are inheriting by marrying them or spending your life with them. It's not the end all be all, but it is pretty important at the very least that you're accepting of whatever situation they're in. You don't have to be perfectly aligned. If I'm really frugal and my spouse wants to spend $1 million a year, well, you've either got to accept that or avoid it because your other option isn't going to be good.
Yeah, this one landed on my honorable mentions, and it could have easily been in my top 5, I believe. I think it dropped a little bit lower. I don't know. I was kind of like back and forth on a few of these ones at the very end here. What's the importance level? Actually, my next one coming up, number 4, was between this and my number 4 that I put down here. But it's so true. Like, it's kind of the Pareto's law or Pareto's rule.
Yeah.
Like 80% of your expenses are probably 20% of your items. And worrying about the big 3 that you mentioned is probably got to make the most impact. Like, whenever I'm doing my end of the year expense recap, I'm not looking at the bottom, anything that I spent $500 or less on. Like, it's marginal in terms of what impact I could potentially do. Sure. Could I call up Juiceland and ask if, when they put their coupons out and I could go do a 50% off coupon? Sure. Like, over the course of the year, that might save me $20-$30 if I did this pretty religiously. But at the same time, clipping those coupons and having to stay on top of that, how much of a workload and exercise is that for me? Probably not worth it. But negotiating $100 or $200 off your rent with your landlord, that might be worth the time and effort, the phone call that you have to make a huge impact on a big line item in your expenses.
Love it. Juiceland. I don't know if we have Juicelands up here.
It's an Austin specific. They have literally taken over Austin. I don't think there's very few juiceries. I think that's the right word. Juiceries and Austin outside of Juiceland. Whenever you come next, I'll take you out because it's definitely one of my favorites.
Got it. Yeah. I don't know how many juiceries we have up here in Rochester. Maybe there's a garbage plate restaurant that's going to start turning garbage plates into a juicery soon, but I can't see it. For some reason, I just can't see it. Okay, let's do number 4. My number 4 was you must automate. That includes paying yourself first. And that also includes things like getting your employer match. So there's some sub bullets there. I might be cheating a little bit, but I think you must automate is a terrific catch-all that it captures many different things, from just making sure that your bills are paid on time and you don't overdraft or you don't screw something up and get a late fee, to making sure that you're saving money and investing money in an automated way, whether it's your 401k, or maybe, $500 a month, your Roth IRA, that kind of thing. Just as you go down the line, as you look at the behavioral research, automation is a key, truly a golden rule for personal finance and investing success.
Yeah, this one, it didn't quite land on my honorable mentions because I couldn't frame it into something, but I had this kind of psychology behavior section that I was trying to pull forward at least one kind of golden rule that encapsulated a lot of these kind of sub bullets that I was thinking on, but automating was definitely something I was interested in. But if I push back, are there any areas or moments or situations where you feel like automation is probably not something someone should be doing at that certain time? Like, for example, if I were to give you something, maybe when someone is first creating their budget, maybe it's not right for them to use an automated tool that summarizes some of those things, but they have to go through the painstaking of actually at the end of each week writing down those expenses so it can really get ingrained in them.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect example, actually. And you're right. I think as people are learning and dipping their toe into some of these things, it helps to be a little bit more hands-on and to be in the weeds a little bit and to really see and feel what's going on a regular basis. Totally agree with that. It's really helpful for the learning curve. You and I can probably both attest to the fact that when we talked about our budgeting before, being in the weeds a little bit there was beneficial for us and probably led to more good than harm. I just think there are some things, and I bet you agree, Justin, like there's some things where once you do it once or twice, then it's time to set it on autopilot because you kind of look at the cost benefit of it all or the risk versus the reward. And the risk is you forget about it. Yeah. And that's not something that you want to flirt with. And so you're just better off setting it and forgetting it in some way.
I promise you, I don't want to pay my bills every single month. Like the fact that is automated and I don't care is great. There have even been times where I wanted to balance my checking, my savings, my investing accounts. And then I finally got that to an automated state as well. Whenever it hits this certain dollar threshold, then it pulls money from my savings back into my checkings. Like you do one overdraft fee and have to deal with the fiasco of getting that off of your statement. I'm pretty much over that, and I figured out a way to automate it. So I think in most of this statement, I think, Jesse, you and I are probably aligned, and we probably agree that automation is for the better, especially whenever it comes to investing, dollar cost averaging, all of the like.
Perfect. I love it. What was your number 4?
My number 4 was play the long game. So what I meant by this is doing the small good things for as long as possible. Of course, I think this is really obvious whenever it comes to investing. And man, you really shook me a little bit on some of those recent episodes when you were talking about like 1997 to 2009, the S&P 500, looking at it from inflation adjusted, like the returns would be 0. Right. But then you tack on like 10 more years behind that from kind of looking at it from like a 20 or 25 year period. And it was something crazy like 10x returns. And I think that's super important in the context of investing for sure, not trying to play the short game and compete with the people that are. I think more harm than good comes from that element. I don't find too much harm from playing the long game in most areas of personal finance.
Not only do I agree, but you're just making me think of, I am now suffering in some cases from the curse of knowledge when it comes to playing the long game, because the communities that we're part of and the things I think about through the best interests, the kind of conversations that we have, the kind of conversations I have at work, everything is focused on the long game. I mean, it is such a good fundamental of personal finance and investing to be focused on the long game. And the curse of knowledge comes about where, last week now, so this is the 3rd year in a row, we're in March, there's a local school district that's invited me to speak at their kind of teachers education, teachers self-improvement day. And I just give a personal finance 101, investing 101 type course, focused specifically with some thoughts on their 403B program, which is kind of like a 401k, and also the New York State teachers pension system. And some of the questions I get during the investing portion specifically, I realized that the definition of investing that these teachers or the school staff have been exposed to is not the long game. Like I can just tell by the question itself. The question is, well, how do I know which companies to buy and how often should I be buying and selling them? And what are some good, like what's a good price to buy a stock at? It'll be a question like that. What's a good price to buy a stock at? And that's a hard question to answer. I mean, you can't answer it shortly, right? Because the real answer is we got to start at ground level. We got to build a foundation up. Just that question itself belies the fact that you're not thinking about investing from a long-term point of view, and totally understandable. I mean, that's why we're doing the things that we're doing here, Justin. But anyway, it's a great one. Yeah, the long game, I think, is so fundamental to the way that I approach it that sometimes I'm caught off guard because I forget the fact that a lot of people out there aren't thinking about it this way, and they'd probably be better off if they were.
Yeah, to push back on my own rule too, I do think you made a pretty good point too in that episode where you're talking about the returns in the S&P 500, that we should be playing the long game, but also, especially for new investors, you should be educating them about what's got to happen in the short game. And that you might see 10, 20% drops, or a year where you get 1 or 2%. And you have to explain the difference between the short and the long game from an investing standpoint. And honestly, one other side note on playing the long game too, I'm also working on getting a little bit better at enjoying the short game and spending a little bit more money right now so I can enjoy a little bit of what's happening right now, here and day in my life. And I don't know if that entirely goes against my number 4, but at the same time, it's like, I don't have to always be looking out for 75-year-old Justin. Like, you can also look out for 30-year-old Justin on occasion too.
Totally. You have to find that balance. I mean, we could probably have that somewhere in here. Maybe my number 5 actually might strike on the balance side a little bit, not to give away too much. Like, I'm sure you're doing plenty of great things right now for 40 and 50 and 60 and 70-year-old Justin. But right, you don't have to put all your eggs in the basket that comes to 30 years from now. You're allowed to take a couple of them and enjoy them today. Make an omelet today, Justin, with some of your eggs.
Well, Jesse, you know my number 5, which was learn about money, invest in yourself, and your tagline, an investment in knowledge pays the best interest. I'm a big believer in it. And the only reason I put it as number 5 is because I just felt like it was a good capstone to my whole list here, but love to hear your number 5.
My number 5, and this is getting into a little bit of the balance, is that you must consider stress along with success. And it harkens back to something we've talked about before, the success to stress ratio. in personal finance. It also harkens back a little bit to our budgeting conversation. And you were talking about, do I want to go through all this effort to save $20 at Juice Land? And it's like, well, if you think about the stress there, and maybe it's not anxiety, maybe it's just the time commitment, or maybe it's the sore fingers because you still have elementary school scissors and you haven't graduated to real scissors yet. I'm not sure. But however you want to measure stress, if you take that stress and then compare it to the success, which in that case might be saving $20, it's like, is that ratio worth it? And again, I don't want to turn life into some giant fraction, but a lot of the personal finance community talks about different ways that you can find benefits in your life, which is awesome. But they have something called denominator blindness, which is when you say, well, I know what the good thing is, but what am I comparing it to? A good example would be like, wow, there were 1,000 car crashes in the United States yesterday. And you say like, well, that's a big number. But then you have to ask yourself, compared to what? Or what's a typical day? Yeah. Is 1,000 car crashes a lot or little? You need to have a denominator to compare that to something. And a lot of the personal finance community will talk about all the benefits of XYZ, or maybe all the downsides of something else. You have to have a point of comparison. And for me, a big one is I can understand the success that comes from budgeting or long-term investing or anything like that. But how much stress am I dealing with along the way? And there are some cases where I say, yeah, that the thing that someone else is doing seems really successful for them. And I wish them well and good for them for finding so much success. But I don't really like how much it's stressing them out, or I think it would stress me out a lot. And therefore, I don't want to pursue that path because it's just not a good ratio for me.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I think I really struggle with this because I'm so math and logical heavy that sometimes decisions, I just always lean that way. It's like, oh, what should I do? Invest or pay off this debt? And it's like always really obvious for me, depending on whatever the numbers say. But I know it's not always obvious, or like there is nuance to that with this kind of unknown factor around stress. And like, what does it got to do for your wellness, your financial wellness and your mental wellness and all of this? And honestly, that's a big reason that I do like financial independence in general. Like I'm somebody that grew up in a very thrifty and frugal household, and money was always a topic of conversation. And I think I just always, going through my 20s, was worried about finances and how am I going to pay for life in the future. And whenever I came into financial independence and kind of came across this theory and idea, I was like, I really like that because it gives me a little bit of safety net and security around, Justin, you can live life exactly how you're living it right now. And this nest egg that you built over here can take care of you. So if something happened to your job or to your health and you couldn't generate income anymore, you're taken care of. And it also allows me to get a little bit more risky with stuff and invest into areas or delegate some of my time elsewhere that I would normally delegate to generating income because I have that mentality. Well, now I can do something over here that long term might pay off really well, but in the short term, I'm looking at it and I'm like, it's not paying me as much as this thing over here is paying me. So it's really helped. The concept and the pursuit of financial independence has really helped alleviate a lot of the macro psychological effect that money has had on me. But yeah, it's weird in the short term, though. I'm always just like super analytical and logical about some decisions.
I mean, one thing that I think the financial independence movement or the idea set of financial independence gets right is, in general, you want to simplify. And earlier in this conversation, Justin, you said simple usually beats complex. When it comes to personal finance and investing. And this rule of mine about comparing that stress to success is very much in that vein where you say, okay, maybe complexity is mathematically going to lead to a slightly better outcome, but it's so much harder to implement. It's so much harder to stick with. It's harder to stomach. It's harder to understand. And a lot of the financial independence movement rather says, no, just kind of simplify. Addition by subtraction usually ends up being a good thing. And I'm mostly agree with that. Justin, are there any things in your honorable mention that you wanted to bring up because you like them? Or are there any rules that I know you were mentioning earlier, you perused the internet and you saw a couple of rules that you thought to yourself, no, I don't agree with that rule at all?
I think we hit on most of my honorable mentions, things that fell into your list or just subsequent to the conversation that we are having today. A couple of things that hit on my disagree. Well, one big one in particular is that you need to set clear financial goals. And this might seem really obvious, but I was starting to think about it. I added it to my list initially because I was like, you know what? Oh, that seems logical. Like that's probably a good rule to have. And then I questioned myself, what is my clear financial goal right now? Is that been important to anything that's actually currently happening in life right now either? And there have been many a times I've floundered through my 20s and my career, not necessarily having financial goals or clear financial goals. And I think that's been okay. Like I'm known from the get-go, like, sure, spend less than you earn, invest the difference, invest in yourself and grow your knowledge. And you're doing kind of all of these things, these macro things that are actually right. And you don't necessarily need a North Star at that particular time. So I actually pushed it down to honorable mentions. And then eventually I pushed it out of, I actually just disagree with this one.
I will say the financial goal setting exercise is becoming more and more and more a big part of what I'll kind of umbrella call professional financial planning. Is the idea that, we need to be thinking on an individual basis with clients, and each client likely has their own unique goals in life, and we need to take that into account. But at the same time, there's kind of a side conversation that's occurring because people are starting to notice if I sit down across from ostensibly a stranger during an early meeting and I say, "Oh, tell me, what are your financial goals?" They might look at me cross-eyed, like, I don't know, retire? Is that a good answer? And so anyway, there's becoming this whole kind of subgenre or subset of conversations within the professional community about, well, what is the information we want to get from our clients? How are we going to help our clients? And really, there's some really great alternative questions, I'll say, that tend to be much more useful and helpful other than just the blanket, like, tell me your goals, or let's set some of your goals. There are better questions to ask. What kind of lifestyle are you living right now? Do you want that? How do you want that lifestyle to change in 3, 5, 10 years? Or, right, if I'm sitting down with a 55-year-old couple who's considering retirement, it might be, hey guys, so you want to retire. What's your retirement lifestyle going to look like? Like, let's talk through that. And then you can kind of back into from there, like, okay, they're going to be spending money like this, and they're going to go on trips that cost that. They're going to give to charity in this way. So you can kind of build their goals from there. But it is very interesting that the question itself or the exercise of just like, tell me your goals. Not everybody knows that answer very clearly. It's something oftentimes I have to help people with. And even then, some people are like, I don't know, Jesse, quit asking me questions. Just, I come to you for advice. Tell me what I'm doing wrong. So especially with younger people too, I think, Justin, that's another thing that you hit on there, which is folks that are our age. It's like, I'm not sure. I want my household to still be in a healthy position this time next year. And I want to make sure my wife and my kid have the support they need. And I know I want to save some money, but beyond that, I don't know. Keep doing what I'm doing. And I think that's an okay answer.
Jesse, what about you? Honorable mentions, disagreements, anything that's left unturned right now?
Yeah, I mean, I did have a couple down in the honorable mentions. I had a couple nitty gritty ones that got into some specifics. Avoiding credit card debt, I think it's a personal finance fundamental in our day and age. But again, maybe it's not quite as broad and important enough to include in the top 5. But I will say I've had a few experiences recently with people who have been in large sums of credit card debt. And it's kind of a scary place to be. And this is coming from individual stories where people were making many, many hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. I mean, what you would call 95th percentile, 98th percentile incomes. And we're not only spending more than they earned, but we're doing so at such a clip that they'd racked up a large credit card debt. And it kind of goes to show it's not about what you earn. I mean, yes, what you earn is very important and it's worth trying to increase. But no matter what you earn, if you spend more than that, you will be in trouble. I laugh every time I say it because it's like, duh. And everybody who knows anything about personal finance says that.
Yep.
But there's a reason why. And that's the important part for everyone to understand. There is a reason why. I need to clap as I say it.
Eat healthy, like from a wellness coach or a personal trainer. It's like, obviously, but you got to call it out because people still don't follow that line of thinking.
Totally. That's exactly right. As far as the diet goes, like that I can attest to. I know there are things I should and shouldn't be eating. And yet I still often eat things that I should not be eating. And I do need someone to slap me on the head and say, put that down. That's cheesecake, Jesse. That's cheesecake. And then the other one I had in towards the bottom, but in my honorable mention, is you must diversify. I think diversification is, they say, speaking of food, the only free lunch in investing. And it really is. It really is. It's this kind of thing where you don't necessarily need 20% returns per year for you to get to a place that you want to go. And diversification is a way to essentially increase it's called your risk adjusted return, but that's way too nerdy of a term. The idea is that you can still achieve very healthy investment rewards while not exposing yourself to too much investment risk or volatility if you properly diversify. Anything on your last minute thoughts, Justin?
I don't think so. I think part of me thought we would have some more disagreement, but part of me now looking at it realized that we're in lockstep a lot around values and principles whenever it comes to personal finance. So I'm actually not that surprised.
I do have one more that you might disagree with, only because I know the way you think and you might disagree with. So this was my last one on my honorable mention, was buy Dogecoin. Kidding, everybody. Kidding. I would not recommend that. No, I agree. I think you and I come from a similar overall perspective to personal finance. So, by and large, we approach this the same way. And speaking of, so we mentioned before, we mentioned the struggle is real. We mentioned your approach to personal finance. Tell us a little bit more real quickly about the struggle is real and how listeners can find you and can find the podcast, Justin.
The struggle is real. It's built for 20-somethings that want to focus on mastering their money now so they don't have to worry about it later on in life. So if that sounds like you, even if you're not 20, come on over. I turned 30 last year, so I'm starting to feel out of touch with my audience as well, and starting to think about some 30-year-old stuff. But yeah, if you're interested in those kind of conversations, and a lot of the ones that Jesse has, feel free to come over. Jesse will be back on the podcast for his third appearance in May. So if you're listening to this around early May, head over to the feed and you'll be able to find Jesse there. Anywhere you listen to podcasts, you should be able to find The Struggle is Real.
Fantastic, Justin. And if people want to reach out after this episode to either give you praise or to make fun of your list, or to just say like, Justin, you should have taken it easy on Jesse. Why'd you do that? How can people reach you?
I think I took it easy on you, but if they want to make fun of the list, definitely you can email me, justin@simplepodstudios.com, or find me on LinkedIn. I'm super active over there as well.
Fantastic. And I will make sure that my production team puts this all in the show notes, Justin, because it's your brother, Kyle. All right, Justin Peters, thank you for stopping by the Best Interest Podcast.
Jesse, thanks for having me on, man.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Best Interest Podcast. If you have a question for Jesse to answer on a future episode, send him an email at jesse@bestinterest.blog. Again, that's jesse@bestinterest.blog. Did you enjoy the show? Subscribe, rate, and review the podcast wherever you listen. This helps others find the show and invest in knowledge themselves, and we really appreciate it. We'll catch you on the next episode of the Best Interest Podcast. The Best Interest Podcast is a personal podcast meant for education and entertainment. It should not be taken as financial advice and is not prescriptive of your financial situation.